Yeah, we are live. We are live. It is Senate Finance. We do have 4 members with us. One is on Zoom. And I've got 2 more who should be coming through the door momentarily, but we have a quorum. So we are going to start with our first walkthrough of page 710. So, Ellen, the floor is yours.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Page 710, as passed by the House, is an act relating to defining electricity generating facilities. So a little bit of context on this. Last year, towards the end of the session, an issue was raised about the definition of plant that is in 30 VSA 8002, which is the definition section used in the Renewable Energy Program chapter. So this is a definition specific to renewable energy, not other kinds of energy, just renewable energy. And the issue came up, and it is a slightly complicated issue. It is deep in the weeds.
Well, I know that Natural Resources had shown me that they are also very interested in this, if we would like to see into them. I said we had to find out what it was first. So.
Sure. So so it came up at the end of last session, and what ended up happening is that a session law provision was added to Act 38, and it directed the Public Utility Commission to meet with the relevant stakeholders and discuss the issues, and gave a few parameters of what they should consider, and then come back with a proposed definition. And they did that. They issued this report in November outlining that they had a couple of meetings with the stakeholders, and they have proposed a definition. And that is what is in H 710. So you'll hear from the Public Utility Commission after me, but this definition is used in a few different places. But anytime that you set you define something, especially if there's an incentive attached, whenever you create a threshold or a cap, people tend to look for ways to get around that. And that is sort of the issue here. So one of the examples that we'll walk through is this definition is used in net metering. Net metering systems receive a higher rate than other solar systems. Mm-hmm. And so there's a cap on that program. It's 500 kilowatts for most systems, except for schools and municipalities, but 500 kilowatts for a system. And so the issue has come up if 2 systems are next to each other. Largely, that's what we're talking about. Is it one system or is it 2 systems, and people are trying to avoid? So there's a couple situations that are discussed in here. And so what is being proposed is a pretty straightforward definition, and then exceptions to that definition. So 30 VSA 8002, the definition of plant. It is sometimes being referred to as single plant, because what we're actually looking at is it one plant or is it multiple plants? So plant means an independent technical facility that generates electricity from renewable energy. We're just talking about renewable energy for this program. Multiple electricity generating facilities, regardless of when each is constructed, shall be considered one plant if the facilities use the same electricity generating technology and are located on the same parcel or contiguous parcels of land. So I'll stop there. So they have defined in this bill, they've included the definitions of what it means to be an electricity generating technology. That's pretty straightforward. It means the method or system used to convert energy from one form into
put up windmills and solar panels. That's 2.
Right. So yeah. So including wind, hydro, water, solar, or biomass. So yes, solar near solar. That's what we're talking about. If it's solar next to wind, that would
fall next to a hydro.
Yeah, but we're looking here at things that are the same type of thing built next to each other.
I think the issue is you put up 100 panels this year. I another 2 acres, I put up 100 panels next year.
Yeah.
And is the issue still with net metering? Utilities are required to buy it, and it is at frequently, sometimes at above market rates.
Yes.
So it's adding to the cost of electricity.
Yeah.
And in this committee, we've all, if we want to move people to electric, we have to keep the cost affordable. And I don't know about present, but I couldn't sell a house with electric heat.
Show more on Saturday.
15 years ago. Yes. But it was purely on cost and, so there's a cost differential and.
Yes.
Can a plant be, sorry,
So
can a plant be like a private home that has,
They
that's
are.
generating, okay, a plant is a private home that's generating. If they have solar and wind and it's going back onto the grid, that's considered a plant.
And we're not talking about a home, we're just talking about just the panels largely or the turbine.
Okay.
But yes, and so the first exception is about personal net metering. So on page 1, H710, line 18, so such facilities shall only be considered separate plants if they meet one of the following exceptions. And so, yes, the most obvious situation that would be opposite of what I just described is individual net metering systems. And so this exception applies on page 2 if the systems are not located on the same parcel of land, are wired to offset consumption on separate billing meters, and supply different retail customers. So this bill is setting out that the default definition is if the same technology is adjacent to each other, that is one plant. However, in a neighborhood, if neighbors have solar panels on both of their roofs, that would violate this definition. And so the first exception is being created to say, okay, net metering, if as long as they're not on the same parcel and they have separate billing meters for different customers, those are separate systems and they are considered multiple plants.
But if I buy a parcel from Farmer Smith and the one contiguous to it from Farmer Jones, and I put up 100 solar panels on each thing, those are still separate.
Those are considered, yes. No, those are considered one plant.
One plant,
Those are considered one plant,
If
even
they're-
if there's a difference in time. Yes.
okay.
So there are 2 other exceptions that potentially they could meet for that. So the next exception is multi-owner individual net metering systems on the same parcels. And this is for common interest communities. So this is an exception if the facilities are located on the same parcel where a common interest community is located, are wired to offset consumption of separate billing meters and supply different retail customers. And so the common interest community we're talking about here are like HOAs or condos.
I was gonna say,
Yep.
the Murray Hill has
Yes.
its own water system. If they put up solar panels in that field above them,
Mhm.
and along with their own water, they were supplying electricity, which was metered and billed to each member of that HOA. That doesn't count.
Yeah, that's
That
fine. That meets this definition. If it's on the same parcel, but it's going to separate meters and separate customers, that's allowed. And the definition of common interest community, in case you're curious, is at the bottom of page 2. It's real estate described in declaration with respect to which a person, by virtue of the person's ownership of a unit, is obligated to pay for a share of real estate taxes on insurance premiums, maintenance, improvement of, or services or other expenses related to common elements, other units and other real estate that the unit described in the declaration. So this is the definition from the common interest community chapter. And so we're not necessarily talking about apartment buildings here with rental. We're talking about people who have an ownership interest.
They own the condo.
Yeah. But there's multiple units on one parcel and
One
one,
parcel and you share some of the expenses.
yes. And so then,
Basically, you don't own the roof and the outside walls.
probably, yeah, I don't know.
That's,
So then there's a third exception. There's an exception for co-location of facilities other than net metering as for standard offer program facilities. So this definition is in chapter 89, the renewable energy programs chapter. So I've already mentioned net metering is relevant to this conversation because there's a cap and you get a significant pay bump if you're participating in that program. Same is true of standard offer program. So standard offer, these are contracts that are bid into the state and they receive a stable contracted rate for their electricity for the length of the contract. And those are typically slightly higher than market. And there's a cap on the amount of electricity in that program. That's 2.2 megawatts. And then the other relevant type of facility that also has a sort of a cap is tier 3 program systems. I'm sorry, tier 2 program systems. So under the renewable energy standard program, tier 2, which utilities are required to have energy that qualifies for tier 2. Those are systems, again, up to 5 megawatts. It's either 2 megawatts or 5 megawatts. I'm pretty sure. I apologize. It's not
Probably.
great.
Since we haven't, I remember spending hours here several years
Yes,
ago
5 megawatts.
on tiers 1, 2, and 3.
Yes.
And perhaps before we take
That's
this up, we could do a
That's right.
101.
You did ask me about that last time. Yes.
I think that would be helpful to
Okay.
refresh everyone's memory because you tend to do a lot of work on it and then you don't work on it for several years as that plays out. And then it comes back for more work as you find times change. But this all started, there were solar tax credit, federal tax credits, there's state tax credits, and the guaranteed return. These were new technologies, and in order to make the capital investment, they needed a guaranteed return, meaning they needed to know they were going to be able to sell their electricity. And so the state required that utilities buy a certain amount, even though it was above market rate. The question, I guess, I mean, this is not dissimilar to what got done for oil and coal in its day. So when people ask me about corporate welfare, I ask if this is what they mean. But it's necessary to get the investment in the new technology, which had a common good. And we did it. The question is, at what point does that industry become mature? At what point do you want to talk about cutting that subsidy off and just saying you've got to compete in the open market? Because the utilities were losing money. And that gets put back on ratepayers. So it's time, and that is a tax and revenue issue. I'm feeling much more comfortable with this committee keeping this one in large part. Because that is really a tax and revenue issue. But we will do our briefing before we do anything else.
And so I just started by reading through the definition and there's a little bit left on this page, but the language that's being struck on page 1, previously when two facilities are being built next to each other, the PUC would consider different factors to determine if they were truly separate facilities or if it was someone trying to get under the cap and add more generation. And they would look at common infrastructure and if they were going to be sharing infrastructure. And if they did, there was an assumption that they were actually the same project, just being spread out over time. And one of the issues that was raised is that requires the utilities, if they want to put multiple projects near each other, if there is a desirable site that no one objects to, it requires them to then put in separate driveways and separate utility poles usually.
Which is
a
like
little
separate
bit-
transmission lines to get the electricity out.
And that may be considered an extra expense and a bit of a waste. And so that was one of the interests, that was one of the reasons that there was some interest from the community in being able to cut down on cost and cut down on the amount of land that's being used.
Yeah, okay. That would make common sense.
This might be a question for you, I'm not sure, but can you just summarize, can someone summarize for me? It's been a long week. What problem this is trying to solve?
So I think it's part of that. Last year, there was a concern raised that there had been I think at least one decision where someone wanted to put in a solar panel project next to a solar panel project that already existed. And a determination was made that they would be considered the same project and therefore violate the rule and not allow them to get the rate they were seeking because they were considered the same project unless they built a separate road and put in separate utility poles. And so I'm not sure if I got the details of that exact. And also I just want to flag, this has been litigated previously, so this has some controversy behind it, but there's interest, and I think you'll hear from the witnesses later about multiple issues when it seemed not intuitive. And that there are sites where multiple projects could be cited, but under the PUC rule, that would not be allowed.
So this is trying to make it more clear, so there's not this.
Stimulation, yes.
Okay.
Last year, when we looked at the PUC and citing, it was solar projects. Which are equally as controversial as cell towers, perhaps more so because they take up more space. They're lower, but they also have physical requirements. They couldn't be in my yard because it doesn't get the sun until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My neighbor that gets the sun at 3 o'clock in the morning has solar panels. They're across the street. It's where the shadow is. So they've got to be in certain locations where they get sun. Which is talking about sun in Vermont for the last 6 months is somewhat interesting. I think we'd all like some sun at this point, but so there's space requirements that are technically required, but there's also impact on neighborhoods, and so far we have not heard the health concerns. And there's also grand list impacts and highest and best use impacts. So it's a new world, and we're finding adjustments as we go forward. And we'll see if this is where we need to be. Okay.
So there's a little bit left though. on
There's
these.
a bit left.
So on page 2, line 10, there's a third exception for co-locations of facilities other than net metering and standard offer. So this applies if facilities have separate points of interconnection. If a net metering facility and a standard offer program facility are not sited on the same or contiguous parcels. So standard offer and net metering under this proposal cannot.
Standard offer is you get paid the market value, or the standard, this is what we pay.
Sort of, but
Sort.
the state has established a contract with the facility
Yeah.
specifically for a rate. This is saying that net metering and the standard offer program cannot be cited on the same parcels. And the statutory cap for the net metering program or the standard offer program is not exceeded on the same or contiguous parcels. So this is, you should hear more about this from the PUC, but this is addressing again that there are some other types of facilities that would qualify that we're talking about here, other than net metering or standard offer. There are these tier 2 projects that would also potentially want to be cited alongside with it. So this is the third exception to this rule. And then, as I mentioned, I started to read through, they've included some definitions that are associated with this. So common interest community for the second exemption. Contiguous here on page 3 means sharing a boundary with another parcel or being adjacent to that parcel. And the two parcels are only separated by road, recreation path, rail lines, stream or river. Electricity generating technology, we've already talked about it. It's solar and solar, wind and wind. It could also be water and or biomass. And then point of interconnection means the point on the interconnecting utility's existing distribution system, which a facility proposes to connect to. So yes, a discrete issue in this bill, but a little bit in the weeds.
Okay. But almost everything in this area is in woods. Okay, so would you be the one or would the PUC, who would be the best place for us to get tier 1, tier 2, 101?
I like when they do it since they administer it. However, I'd be happy to do it if you need me to. Because also tier 4 and tier 5, you haven't even
That's
mentioned.
right. Well, maybe we will ask the PUC and see how receptive they are. Because I know how busy you are. And see if they would give us a 101 on the tiers. And
Of the renewable energy.
renewable energy standard would be a better, I guess, thing for them to give us a 101 on, and then comments on this bill. And we'll see if we can get them in. I know Peter Sterling is coming in.
Well, we're supposed to have the PUC.
Yes, I think the PUC
No,
is
the
coming.
PUC is now. Okay. See if I can- That's right. All right. Well, we talked this on them. Are they coming in?
We're supposed to be.
All right.
While we're waiting, I'm gonna bring these
in there.
upstairs. Yeah.
And I've invited Ellen, if you're free to
Yeah.
come back.
I'm gonna stay.
Okay, and just a walkthrough on 9. Well, it's more of a committee discussion. I know natural resources would like 940. But there's a couple things in there and I'm not going to relinquish it with our report intact. But I want to make sure that that's what the committee wants to do. Before we relinquish anything. There seems to be a lot of committees that want our bills this year. Different committees and different bills. Nobody wants the ones that have implied fees. Which we've gotten several of. But we can stand at ease here for a couple minutes, like 2. And hope that the PUC people show up. Yeah.
Would you like to go at 5?
Let's go. I don't need course that's going off live in 1 minute. You know, all the school kids today. It would be that time of year. So any
Easter eggs around.
Well, apparently there's also parent teachers conferences going on. Let's get out. This one. I got 4.
PUC and you?
Mhm.
Are they online?
No, we're still waiting, but they've got about 1 minute. There they are.
Well, take a minute to sit down.
Okay, it's, we can start, is,
No, that's not.
that's right, he had a teacher conference, so. We need one more member to come back in the room, so I have a quorum. I'm having quorum issues today. So we were going to invite the PUC to come back, unless you'd like to do it today. To perhaps give us a little walkthrough of tier 1, 2, 3, 4, and renewable energy standard. So that we know, just, there's new members on this committee and it has been several years since we've really done anything there. So anything, just a really quick refresher would be helpful if you can.
Absolutely, I will let our chair know, and there's another staff person who's over on the renewable energy standard.
Okay. That
Happy to do it, and I will let them know as soon as we're back.
we will get them scheduled because that's a good foundation to have before we make decisions. Here we go. All right, I have.
Percent.
1, 2, 3. I have 4.
That works pretty good.
Wait, I've lost another one. All right,
I'm here.
you're here, so we're gonna keep going. Okay. So this is on 710. Just introduce yourself for the record and the floor is yours.
Just making sure that my colleague Wes, who's here, can get the presentation up. That is not.
And I've got Steph and Wesley's. Are you together? You're all here? All right.
All here.
Whatever works, you can come up together. If you have separate testimony, just let us know.
Yeah, I thought I'd come up about
Okay.
halfway through when it's
Okay,
my turn.
whatever works. All
And
right.
we're presenting.
Thank you so much, Senator Cummings, and for the committee to have us here. My name is Steph Hoffman. I'm the general counsel at the PUC, and with me is staff attorney Wesley Skidmore. We're here to present on H710, which covers the definition of plant, changes to the definition of plant in 30 ESA section 8002, it's definition 18. We also filed with the committee a recommendation on some language regarding a decommissioning fund proposal that we hope to prepare an introduction today for you to walk through that concept. So in 2025, Act 38 passed. That act required the PUC to prepare a recommendation to the committees of jurisdiction regarding the definition of plant that had been discussed during that legislative session with various interested parties. We were required to engage those set of interested parties in the process of getting to a definition, a recommended definition. And it gave us 3 things we had to consider in that process. The first is land use benefits of co-locating energy generation facilities, ensuring comprehensive review of co-located facilities and potential ratepayer impacts. And so those considerations were discussed in detail in the recommendation that we presented to the committees. This is a little bit more detail in the process that we engaged in as a result of Act 38. We convened proceedings at the commission, much like a court would. We open a case essentially. We opened that proceeding last June after the conclusion of the legislative session, and we did 2 things in that proceeding from the very beginning. We sought input on the definition of the word plant as defined in 8002, and we also put out proposed statutory language regarding the establishment of a decommissioning fund. We paired these 2 things together because the stakeholders, the interested parties.
It's a decommissioning for these plants.
Yes, for renewable
Okay.
generation
In
systems.
this committee, traditionally decommissioning fund was Vermont Yankee.
Yes.
This is not the same decommissioning.
No, and Wes will explain a little bit that the requirement for us to ensure decommissioning happens comes from section 248B5 where there are requirements regarding the commission's involvement in making rules around how decommissioning will be ensured for each of those projects. In our proceeding itself, we engaged in a written comment period. There were 2 rounds of written comments provided in July and September of last year. In September, at the conclusion of those written comments, we issued a conceptual plan for the decommissioning part of the proposal. We held 2 workshops at the end of September, one on the definition of plant and one on the decommissioning proposal. And then we provided a final opportunity for comment on the definition of plant that is part of our recommendation to the committees. When we went through this process, we tried to think about these 2 issues together simply because the interested parties are all the same. We have a renewable development community, we have state agencies that appear in our proceedings, we have different interest groups that get involved in these proceedings. And so that process was hand in hand for both of these topics.
Sorry to interrupt. So the decommissioning is of solar and wind plants? What is that? I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the decommissioning piece.
Yes, and we'll go into more detail about this at the second part of this presentation. But yes, it's renewable energy generation facilities and energy storage facilities, both of which have a decommissioning obligation. So at the end of the project's useful life, they have to either take that project down or put it to another useful purpose, basically.
And the useful life is usually, we know.
There's a range. Originally, it was conceived of as probably 25 to 35 years in that range. Useful life is actually typically defined by the economic viability of the project to continue operating.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Absolutely. So after this process concluded, we prepared our recommendations and submitted them to the committees of jurisdiction for your review, and then we've been to several of them to talk about our recommendation. So just to explain where we're coming from before where we've landed now for consideration of the committees in H710, the current definition of plant is on the screen here, and it has essentially 2 components. It asks whether the facilities that are proposed or existing are the same project, and if they use common equipment and infrastructure. And then at the end of that definition, it explains that common ownership, contiguity in time of construction, and proximity are all relevant to determining the same project component of that test. Because many of these terms are not defined, and because they're concepts that are not exactly fine line in the sand divides them, we have had a lot of litigation around these issues and whether 2 or more facilities are the same facility matters for several renewable energy generation project programs, namely net metering, standard offer, and the qualification under 8005A for the renewable energy standard, maximum of 5 megawatts to qualify those facilities for renewable energy credits that are tier 2 credits. So all 3 of those programs have capacity caps. You can't exceed those caps to be in those programs. And so this definition is used in our cases to decide whether what's being proposed can be compensated at those rates for those programs or can receive renewable energy standard tier 2 designation. So as part of our process, we were looking at the 3 factors given to us in Act 38, as well as many of the concerns that have arisen in our proceedings over the course of the last 7 to 10 years, where this has become more and more of an issue as more and more renewable energy generation becomes co-located or is attempted to be co-located. So we developed a new standard that does the following things. It sets as a baseline that if a project, more than one project, is on a facility, so it's on a parcel or a contiguous parcel, and uses the same electricity generating source, meaning solar and solar, wind and wind, hydro and hydro, then it cannot be on the site together and not be considered a single facility, one site. That's the dividing line. So it's parcel or contiguous parcel plus same generating technology. That's the baseline standard. There are 3 exceptions to that baseline standard. The first is for individual residential net metering. We don't want 2 neighbors to not be able to put solar on their roof as individual residential customers of a utility and have residential size net metering, because this definition says contiguous parcels would be ineligible. So we have an exception for that. The second exception is multi-owner individual residential net metering or common interest communities. Think duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, some forms of group housing. When you have those arrangements, it would preclude individual utility customers from each having net metering at their house, again, at a residential scale, because they're living in the housing that accommodates more than one family. And so this is a multi-owner, and mind you, owner, so renters, it would be a different situation, but multi-owner arrangements where they would want to be able to do residential size net metering.
What about like 20 units, condo units in the same development? Is that considered, is that an exception?
That would be, as long as it meets the definition of a common interest community, which condominium units are considered a common interest community. You have to keep in mind that facilities, plants still have to meet the section 248 criteria. This is just a screening mechanism to determine whether they're eligible as separate facilities to go forward with separate applications. Whether they actually meet all the criteria under section 248 to be permitted, given a certificate of public good, is a separate inquiry that is apart from the screening mechanism. The third exception is for more than one renewable energy program facility on a parcel or contiguous parcel. This is the most complicated of the exceptions, and we did some rewriting of it that you see in 710, and I'm going to show some examples of this. But this is to ensure that no individual incentive program is exceeding its capacity cap. So you don't want more than 500 kilowatts generation capacity on a site for net metering, same parcel, contiguous parcel. Same for a standard offer program. You don't want more than 2.2 megawatts for the capacity cap, and you don't want more than 5 megawatts in res tier 2, except for the res tier 2s can be if they have different points of interconnection. I'll explain that when we show the examples. We also provided some definitions that would be added to the end of the definition section, or in the alphabetical place they belong, of common interest community, the word contiguous, electricity generation technology, and point of interconnection. So this is the text of exception C, and it says that the exception is for co-location of facilities other than net metering program or standard offer program facilities, and applies if they have separate points of interconnection. So you're allowed to have more than one renewable energy generation facility on a parcel or contiguous parcels, so long as essentially you're not exceeding the capacity caps for the program's net metering standard offer, and you're not putting net metering and standard offer on the same site or contiguous sites.
I think we've got net metering, standard offer, just refresher. That's the utilities buy at market rate, essentially.
So the standard offer program involves an RFP process that the commission instigates, where projects bid in
Right.
and are selected based on their cost per generation amount, so per kilowatt hour generated, and utilities are required to purchase a certain amount of power through the standard offer program. The last RFP sort of met the overall capacity cap of the program that happened 2 years ago. However, there is some capacity that hasn't yet been built in that program, which is just contracted for. So this is an illustration, rudimentary, I admit, to try to illustrate the point. Each of these rectangular boxes, imagine, is a parcel or could represent contiguous parcels. It's not important which one, but just within the geographic bounds that would constitute a single facility under the standard definition provided. And these show 3 different things that under the new definition can be cited, but under the current definition of plant could not. So A shows when you have 500 kW of net metering on a site. Again, I'll use site as a simplistic term that could be contiguous parcels, plus a 5 megawatt PPA, which would be the tier 2 projects we're talking about. And the way that a PPA arrangement works is a direct contract with the utility itself. between the merchant generator who's developing that facility and the utility. So they negotiate a market-based price for that contract. And that's how that's how those tier 2 projects come down. In example B, you have essentially the same, but with standard offer swapped out for net metering to show again, you could have a 5 megawatt res tier 2 project on that site with standard offer. And on in example C, you can see there you'd have 2 5 megawatt PPA projects, and they would just have to have separate points of interconnection. But all of these facilities would, if for engineering reasons, have separate points of interconnection because you cannot connect to the grid at the same point, although it's of course feasible in some rare circumstances. That's not how most projects come before us. What still can't be done under this new definition, and we did this because we believe that the policy rationales for these heightened incentives in net metering and in standard offer dictate that there are capacity caps for a reason. You don't want more than 500 kW of net metering. You don't want more than 2.2 megawatts of standard offer because those programs give higher compensation for these types of projects, and dispersed renewable energy generation under those programs was part of the legislative goal of developing those incentives. And so the definition is used to screen out still exceeding either one of those caps. So you cannot have net metering and standard offer on the same site. Similarly, you can't have more than 500 kW of net metering or more than 2.2 megawatts of a standard offer program. And it encourages that distributed generation under both of these programs. And it essentially prohibits any siting that would violate the letter and spirit of those statutory caps. Alright, so my portion of the presentation on the definition of plant is done unless anyone has any follow-on questions. I'm going to turn it over to Wes, and he's going to talk more about the decommissioning fund concept that we submitted a letter to the committee on.
Thanks, Steph. I'd like to thank the chair and thank the committee for having us. As Steph already described, we chose to couple the single plant.
Need you to introduce yourself for the record.
Okay, got it. I'm Wes Skidmore and I'm a staff attorney with the Public Utility Commission. So Steph noted that we chose to accompany the single plant process with process related to sort of looking into our current decommissioning of primarily solar generation facilities process and look at if there were any other potential solutions there. Really what we're talking about here is the potential creation of a decommissioning fund to ensure that at the end of the useful life of solar projects and battery projects, that those sites are able to be decommissioned. So removal of all, metal and components for the technical processes, as well as restored to their original condition. So that's what we mean by decommissioning. And as Steph noted, that would occur typically at the end of the useful life of a project. So 25 to 35 years. With modern solar panels, it might be longer. So I'm going to start just with a little bit of background, and the main background concerns a statute that we see at the commission very regularly. That's 248. Essentially, section 248 is the statutory standard we apply to applications for certificates of public good, which is are essentially what we call permits for developers to build energy generation sites or storage sites. Subsection A5 of 248 requires that the commission adopt rules to ensure, quote, that facilities are removed once they are no longer in service. And in response to that requirement, we promulgated a rule 5.900, Commission Rule 5.900 in 2017 to carry out that statutory requirement. And that rule really has two aims. Number one, to require certificate of public good recipients to establish a plan and commit to decommissioning those facilities at the end of their useful life. And requirement number two is to establish that as a developer, they have sufficient financial assurances to support that decommissioning when it needs to occur. I want to note here, very important, the rule really applies, we're talking about privately developed solar and energy storage installations, not utility owned sites. And we're only talking about generation or storage sites that are greater than 500 kilowatts in size. So we're talking much more here about the large 20 megawatt solar arrays in Vermont rather than the small scale net metering facilities. In fact, those are not subject to this requirement at all. We have a requirement that net metered solar arrays decommission, but the owners of those sites are not required to go through the same rigorous process that a large scale developer is.
That's a lot of scrap.
Yeah. So what does this process actually look like right now for a solar developer? Developers are required to first obtain an estimate for decommissioning and site restoration costs as part of their process in front of us seeking a CPG. They have to obtain, maintain, and update a financial instrument covering the estimate they arrive at's cost for the life of that facility from an A-rated financial institution. So essentially very reputable banks. They have to file that instrument with us. We keep paper copies, and they have to provide periodic updates to accommodate inflation. And typically we require those updates to happen every 3 years. So they owe us a report every 3 years that incrementally increases the total estimate. And then the last requirement is they have to eventually decommission their site at the end of its useful life. At which point we as the commission would release any claim we have to the financial instrument they provided us with. Now in practice, all the solar arrays in Vermont are many years away still from needing to decommission. But obviously we're bound by the statutes right now, regardless of whether those panels are ready to come down. And there are a lot of terms I'm throwing out here. I'm not going to go in and define all of them, but if you have any questions about terms I'm using, please feel free to ask. So what are the challenges with the current system, and why are we coming before you to advocate for a change? We think there are challenges from both the side of the PUC and from the developer side. From the PUC side, what we see is fundamentally, we've been tasked to ensure decommissioning by statute. But we otherwise have no regulatory interaction with those developers once we've given them their CPG, once we've given them their permit. Unlike, for example, a utility company, which we interact with Green Mountain Power on a regular basis. So we don't regulate these merchant generators, what we call them, in the same way that we regulate monopoly utilities. And importantly, we do not currently have statutory authorization to actually meet our obligation at the end of the useful life of these facilities when they actually will have decommissioning expectations. And so what do I mean by that? Well, it's an administrative constraint. Effectively, if we needed to call on one of these paper documents from a bank and say, here, bank, we have a document, we're owed XYZ dollar amount of money. We have to meet this obligation. We don't have anywhere we can deposit that money. And of course, this is years down the line. But if we actually were needed to decommission a site and restore the site, we don't have the ability to access funds needed. We have a paper document that gives us a right to access those funds, but that's different than actually having the money in an account somewhere. Another administrative constraint we've identified is really the significant workload on the PUC that this process entails currently. As I mentioned, there's a triennial, every 3 years, requirement that these instruments be updated for inflation. That requires engagement with formal commission processes. That requires assigning a staff member, that requires the staff member to review documents. Oftentimes we see these financial instruments from the banks follow a template. The bank template might not be the same template as our template. And they're, essentially then is a back and forth with the developer attorney in the middle. And this could happen 12 years after the solar panels have all been put up. They're still required to come back before us, and we're still required to engage in this sort of intensive review of those documents. Another constraint we've identified is that it might be very difficult for us to legally enforce these instruments. Remember, these pieces of paper from a bank, in the event we actually had to, even if we had a valid claim. We have concerns that it would require litigation. We have concerns that the banks might not be as willing to comply as they are willing to provide that piece of paper when it actually comes to it. And remember that the claims we would have to make would not be with the people who develop or own these solar projects or battery projects. We would have to go make a claim against a large financial institution. The second point on the slide is substantial noncompliance. Really, that's quite simple. Over the last year and a half, the commission engaged in an audit of overdue compliance for cases that have been before us. And we found that 60 to 65% of facilities that were required to maintain these financial instruments with us were out of compliance. So that could either mean the instrument wasn't updated. That could mean that the instrument had never been filed after the draft was filed with us. It could mean that the instrument filed with us most recently was deficient in various ways, and so on. And this noncompliance really demonstrates a regulated entity constraint. Yes.
Just so I understand. They come in, you say, you get a piece of paper from the bank. Does that piece of paper say X amount of dollars have been deposited in this account? Okay, and this.
It typically works that way, but
Okay.
not always. There,
And they are supposed to put every 3 years, there should be an updated assessment of what it's going to cost to
Right.
remove. And they're supposed to put extra money in. But you were finding that you get a letter from the bank saying you can access this money in 20 years if you need it. But there's never any money put in it, or there might be money put in it originally, but then the follow-up money or not enough follow-up money is going in. And it's going to take a substantial amount of effort and probably court action to do this. And none of this is even dealing with if somebody goes bankrupt and it's gone. In which case the state of Vermont is sitting on this mess. And okay, because 20 years from now, we could all be on hydrogen or something. Okay.
Well, can I ask a question? Are there any penalties for non-compliance?
we have the discretion to issue penalties for noncompliance. I believe, and Steph can correct me if I'm wrong, we found such substantial noncompliance that we wanted to at least offer a grace period to allow developers to come back into compliance. And that grace period is wrapped up or close to wrapping up. And to the extent that some developers still haven't filed the proper documentation with us, certainly that's an avenue we could explore. Do you have anything to add on that point? So
Well, I'll just say the non-compliance was a huge red flag for us, that there's a problem with the methodology, right? The system itself, submitting letters of credit, escrow agreements, bond agreements, some of which are money in a bank and some of which are just a promise, right? They're promissory notes.
I go bankrupt.
Right, and if you haven't been paying for your promissory note,
Yeah.
essentially, because you've absconded, then that note is meaningless anyway. So
Yeah.
the system itself, we believe, is flawed based on the state.
And I'm assuming it is taking you a lot of time and money. I understand that some of these developers are from overseas, which I'm sure makes things even more difficult or challenging. Okay, And the bottom line is where this might not be as toxic as nuclear waste. There's a lot of it, that will have to be disposed of somewhere. And so it is in our best interest to make sure, but and in the most efficient way possible, because you have limited staffing and time. It's all fine.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. We have an obligation to make sure that these solar sites are decommissioned and restored one day. But we certainly don't have the staff to actually go out in the field and do that work. And we don't currently have the ability to deposit the money in an account and pay contractors to do that work. So we're sort of stuck in terms of what action we could actually take if we needed to decommission right now. And we have some time. That's one advantage we have, is we have some time before these facilities do reach the end of their useful
Make it
life.
easier for them to pay in because the payment is spread over time,
Mhm.
unless they don't. Okay,
So the last item on this slide really is just there's a significant amount, as you've identified, of liability and uncertainty, and that would really be liability that the state is faced with. That would be the liability of communities having decaying infrastructure in their midst. So what have we proposed? Well, in short, we've proposed a fund. This would generally have the attributes you see on the screen. We're thinking there would be an upfront contribution. We think the fund would be managed by the commission with collaboration from state treasury. We think the fund would have the opportunity to grow over time based on some sort of reasonable conservative interest rate. The fund would have a huge advantage in the sense that it would be available for us to call upon regardless of the status of those developer entities. Bankruptcy notwithstanding, the money's going to be in an account. The fund and the interest borne on that fund could cover the costs the commission incurs to administer it, and the fund could account for overruns. The specifics of establishing the fund as we envision it would be developed over the course of a commission rulemaking. So these are general attributes, and we would fine tune that in a
this
rulemaking.
would be an investment fund, probably in the treasurer's office.
That's right. We think it would be a special fund.
Okay, so treasurer.
There are similar examples that A&R uses that are, effectively cleanup funds for
Send
hazardous waste.
the cleanup fund. Clean.
So as Steph noted earlier, we did receive some input from interested parties coupling this proceeding with the single plant proceeding. But we really think that more input is needed. And we think there would also need to be a consultation process with outside experts for the establishment of the fund. And we've heard from several institutions, some within Vermont, that would have interest in offering time in some capacity. But we would need to undertake an RFP process and engage consultants to sort of do that complex actuarial or accounting work needed to actually set this up. In the proceeding we conducted over the course of the last year, we received limited feedback on our decommissioning proposal, and we're providing with this presentation, I believe it was emailed to the committee yesterday or the day before, all comments that included feedback on the decommissioning proposal that we received over the past year in that case. Feedback, to the extent we received, it did center around that contribution amount from the developer. There was a lot of interest in that topic specifically, as well as interest about potential return of funds. And we've proposed some statutory language that the committee has been provided, and that language does, as I noted, contemplate further process to refine this idea. And I just want to reiterate that the goals of this shift really are to minimize regulatory engagement, right-size costs and financial assurances, and really ensure that the state of Vermont is not burdened by dormant or abandoned infrastructure. And I have a opportunity for questions and comments
Okay,
here.
what happens to the money that is supposed to be or may not be in those bank accounts? The money that's supposed to have gone in, which sometimes hasn't gone in. I'm assuming that there will have to be some pay-in for existing solar arrays that
It
probably have to be pretty individualized.
we think that the process, we don't see a path for us to demand that facilities that are already built and already have their permits that they have to opt into this fund. In effect, we have instruments for those places, and it is our job under the status quo to pursue them to make sure those instruments are properly maintained. With that said, we think there's a real opportunity here for substantial cost savings, even for the developers that already have projects built. That's mainly because every 3 years right now, they're required to interact and pay fees with the bank or a different financial institution. They're required to retain an attorney. They're required to file those updated instruments with the commission. Sometimes, if not always, they're required to put additional money aside due to inflation. And a big source of uncertainty for developers is there could be deficiencies in their filings that would cause us to reject them, and we do. We have to, because we have to ensure decommissioning, and that doubles the costs because then they have to go back to the bank. They have to, use their attorneys for even more billable time and so on. So we're thinking back of the envelope math. Every 3 years, developers under the status quo may be on the hook for something like $3,000 to $4,000 as things currently stand, just to get their filings updated with us right now. And we believe that there's a very doable path to creating a fund that requires contribution amounts that still make that fund attractive for existing projects because of the cost savings.
Okay. When I'm just thinking if municipal employees join state pension fund, there is a block payment to make up for the fact that you haven't been paying into the fund for X number of years. And then you get into that regular payment cycle. That might be a system, because it sounds like some of these developers have been doing the right thing and they've been putting money in the bank. And some of them have, or maybe not as much money. It's costing them to file with you. It's costing you to look at them. So in the long run, this would be one payment up front, which would then be an investment fund, like a pension fund. So you do it and be done with it. Or maybe if you had to pay it when you were looking at a lot of capital expenses, you pay it over time, but okay.
So as I noted previously, we really think it would be best to have a proceeding to refine all those points.
Okay.
But in our minds, from where we stand right now, an upfront contribution is one viable path that makes sense. We don't feel that we have the expertise to, come to you with a dollar. That's why we think we need further process, and we need to retain experts. But the upfront contribution model is we think one strong approach. We think there's another benefit to that approach, which is these developers do have to engage with us, the regulator, when they want the permit to build a project.
Right.
So to the extent we do have engagement with them, it's really at that
Yeah.
So for all new projects, there's a very clear path to requesting an upfront fee. It's our view that the economics of this fund would also, as I said, make it attractive even for older projects.
So what does this bill do? Because it sounds like you're not quite ready for prime time. to Put all the particulars in the law. Does this just allow you to set up? What does this bill allow you to do at this point?
This bill does really two main things. One, it allows us to retain consultants for economic purposes. Generally,
Does that include money?
what do you mean for
We're paying
banking?
for consultants, because if it does, it's going on the wall across the. It doesn't, okay,
So the second thing it does is it creates a fund and instructs the commission to open a proceeding to refine the details of that fund with engagement from the developer community, other interested parties. It allows us the authority to bill back to that fund the costs of a consultant. So that's where we would come up with their paychecks. And it would give us the ability, once that fund is created, to draw upon it if needed for decommissioning at the end of the useful life of these facilities.
what else could you draw upon it for?
It's limited to the purposes of decommissioning. It's not an
Okay.
attempt to create a slush fund.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
pretty restrictive in that way.
Because we're asking developers to pay into it.
Right.
In return, when they're ready to shut the thing down, or it's dilapidated, it needs to be shut down, they're not going to be hit with a big upfront cost at a time that their revenues have stopped coming in. They will have paid in over time, and if this is an invested fund, hopefully they will be making a lot more than they will just with money sitting in a bank account.
Can I clarify one point about that? This fund is not, it's built for the delinquency. It's not built as an insurance mechanism to fund all decommissioning that has to happen. So projects still will maintain their obligation. And just to clarify, there are plenty of developers who, yes, this is for delinquency situations. So the status quo, if everyone's doing what they're supposed to, is at the end of the useful life of a project, that owner will either convert the project to a new useful purpose
Yeah,
or take it down to the standards that are required by the certificate of public good, and they pay for that. And they have other
so
mechanisms
what are
in
they
their process.
putting in the, what they're putting in the bank is money in case they walk away from it.
Yes, in the status quo, that is what they're doing.
And you're saying, rather than put the money in the bank, you're going to have them pay into an investment account, which will give you some backup money in case they don't fulfill their obligation to decommission at the end.
Yes, or they haven't properly anticipated the total cost, i.e. a cost overrun occurs. It is an insurance fund against delinquencies, much like a car insurance fund is an insurance fund against accidents. And so this fund is not to fund all future decommissioning. And so it'd be built right size for that purpose, because we don't actually want to be in the business of decommissioning sites. We don't want to retain excavators,
No,
etc.
see, you don't.
Only in the circumstance where the state is holding that obligation because of delinquency will we be tasked with that.
Okay, I mean, I'm thinking for the developer, it would be easier to pay X annually and have it invested, so when they come to decommissioning, their money's there.
And they have mechanisms for that in the private marketplace, is our
Private market,
understanding.
Okay,
We need this money from our perspective for the reasons that 248A5 says we need the money, which is it is on the commission to ensure decommissioning
Okay,
from of
so
all
this is
projects.
your insurance backup.
Instead of working through those third-party financial entities
Okay.
as the intermediary of the funds, the state holds it, the state has access to it, there is no question.
And they won't have to come in and update every 3 years.
So cost savings, mutual benefit, win-win is the goal.
So they will pay you up front. You're gonna invest it, you're gonna have your delinquency fund that won't be every 3 years dealing with the bank.
And,
Alright.
and just to clarify one other point, right now, if you were to build, let's say, a 5 megawatt solar array.
Yeah.
You may be looking at, a situation where you find a A-rated bank and you put aside $150,000, maybe $200,000. This is one way they provide these assurances in an account, and that money is frozen. The bank then, because they have that money in an account, signs a document that they provide to us, and that's what we can call upon if the developer 20 years, 30 years, 40 years down the line doesn't decommission the site. On top of that frozen sum of money, the developer also has to pay costs associated with renewing that instrument every 3 years. What we're thinking, and again, we don't have hard numbers because we need to retain experts to come up with those numbers and give us a formula. We're thinking a dramatically lower amount of money would be contributed to this fund. Because in all reality, we don't view there being a possibility of the vast majority or even a majority of these projects at all needing to be decommissioned. We think there are some serious incentives for developers to decommission their sites. And we anticipate a low level of delinquency. And so really, we're not looking for hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of contributions. We think there's a low number that that all parties can agree on that allows the developers to disengage with that regulatory process over the life of their project.
But the fact is, we haven't. It's like a nuclear plant. We haven't decommissioned any. So we won't know till we get there. How much. I mean, yeah, what's the penalty for not decommissioning? To just declare bankruptcy, disband and walk away. Go out of business. And
I can say that,
I mean, I could see if you're gonna decommission this plant and you've got 5 more, you're gonna want to stay on the state's good graces. But we don't have any experience on which, because we never decommissioned these. I think the only thing we decommissioned is Vermont Yankee. And that was a little different.
right,
As far as we know, these are toxic. We may find out they're full of PFOAs or something in them is toxic.
your point is well taken that Vermont has a relatively young solar and battery market. In some of the southwestern states where that market is a bit more mature, there has been some decommissioning occur. And in my understanding is in the vast majority of cases out in the Southwest, there's a huge incentive to repanel the site.
I would assume so, as long as solar is what we're doing, or. But technology is changing very rapidly. And there is the potential that, like coal, the market increases significantly. So, this need to think through all eventualities.
And I will add, the status quo is that the estimation process occurs now, like
Yeah.
how we're getting to these estimates is part of the status quo as well. And so that variable doesn't shift with the new fund model. It is part of both. You're right. We absolutely need to understand that eventual number. There are also other financial incentives associated with the site itself, not just the infrastructure, being solar and solar forever. Because of points of interconnection, because of upgrades to infrastructure, because of tax depreciation benefits to stay with the project until it is fully either taken down or repaneled, repurposed. Not everyone is going to operate within those constraints. You're absolutely correct, but that's why we're saying we think delinquency is a very small subset of the potential here in this marketplace. And that we need to, this is very akin to what the current directive is, and in fact, puts a lot more behind that directive. Is right
This
now it
definitely
says,
seems like a superior program.
yes, and we think so too, but we also recognize that there's still some unknowns and that's hard to pin down. But right now we have a sentence in A5 that says we must ensure decommissioning of the sites and go about that, make rules, promulgate rules. And we think that looking at this from a different angle with a different regulatory sort of tension throughout and extension of that pension over 30, 40 years helps us get the assurance faster, being the state of Vermont, and ensures that projects can properly plan economically, understand the contribution from the get-go, not over a long time horizon, et cetera. And that benefits, when you have mutual benefit of regulator and regulated entity in that respect, the results tend to be better than the results we're seeing with this system. And that's what I mean by certainly that red flag when you have significant non-compliance. Probably the system isn't working properly and it's not effective at both levels, regulator and regulated.
Yeah, you're not a bill collection agent.
No, and we aren't good at that. We're also not good at the restoring soil horizons and removing the panels, and those are all things that,
Plant the trees.
yes, exactly.
Okay, committee, questions? Thank you. Thank you. Okay,
Thanks so much.
we've got 10 minutes. Peter is here. And I have a feeling I'm not gonna keep this committee later to talk about what is it? 9:40. 9:40. There it is. I'm looking at the committee.
No, I have to go. I'll stay a little longer, but I have to go soon.
Okay. I mean.
But you guys can stay.
Are you anticipating it being a long discussion? I think potentially you're trying to make a decision.
I'm trying to make a decision
So,
as
what-
to at which point,
Yeah.
or do we at all relinquish 940 to natural resources? So I think we will have
So
a very
maybe we'll-
brief discussion.
It might not be a long discussion, I'm sorry, but I
Okay,
don't know that.
judging by the amount of discussion right now,
Wow.
I wouldn't say we're gonna have a
Why?
long discussion. Okay,
Do we want to touch?
Peter, come on, 940.
Do we want to do that, or Ellen, are you staying for 7:10?
I can stay, yes.
I was gonna say, if we just talk about 9:40 real quick, we're not on.
We
till
thought we
10:30.
were going to get in between. I've only got 5 minutes before Peter's scheduled. If Ellen's.
I'm fine, I can stay.
Okay, this is the second day we've had Ellen on call. Last week, I think we had her on call every day. In case we got off the floor. Okay, Peter.
Not that 9:40?
Well, we're waiting for Peter. Oh, I think it's okay. Let it go to natural resources.
So is that the question we're kind of posing? Do we want natural to take a peek at it?
Do we want to relinquish the bill
Yeah.
to them? This one they can do recommendations on, but I think this is more squarely in our domain. The other one is a lot of energy planning in it. There's a couple with some deadline or something we.
So it's only three things.
Okay,
It's the use of thermal funds by VED
yes,
for their thermal and transportation programs. It's the energy plan, updating the regional planning statutes to address the energy planning. And then the repeal of the telecommunications advisory board that hasn't met since 2001.
that was the one
Yeah.
that we needed to do. Yes.
2021, sorry.
All right.
That's what it was.
So
Should it start off there? Let natural,
the,
you do?
Yeah, it's here.
Oh, I know, but
we have the bill. The
Recommend.
Secretary of the Senate, in his wisdom, sent it to us. I don't know if it would automatically go to them unless we relinquish it. I was told the yield would automatically come. But that's under Rule 31 because it hits the revenues of the state. So I think we have to ask to be relieved with our record intact and be sent to them. And then they can work on it. So we'll get this in next week. I think we can take care of those three sections pretty quickly. And, or the week after, it may actually end up being up. Talk to Charlotte and see if we can get that in. Okay, that's easy peasy.
love it.
Okay.
Thanks, Ellen.
I started going to the 50K miscellaneous tax bill, folks. We're gonna be busy. Okay, Peter, come on.
Joy.
You know the drill.
I do. Hi, my nightmare is trying to do computer stuff in public.
Do you need?
You're not alone.
We got a
We got
spot right here.
It'll last. Charlotte, do you see me
Oh,
trying?
there you are now.
Yeah, I'm trying to do a screen check. Peter Sterling, Executive Director, Renewable Energy Vermont. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes of your time today to hear me walk through the benefits of single plant. Let me just see if I can share this successfully. Can you make me a co-host? Or is
Yeah.
that-
You should.
Got a couple slides that I think just illustrate what I'm saying. I only need a couple minutes.
I think we're losing everybody's attention spans.
Okay, here we go.
No, you could do that. I
Oh.
would say if you only have a couple slides, that will work very well.
Good. Okay, do you see me or is it?
Yeah, it says your co-host.
Oh, here it is. Share. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
You got it.
All right. Okay, so, the current single plant law limits solar development on good sites. And you can see the picture on the right there. There's a 2.3 megawatt solar array on an old gravel pit in Hardwick. And that's in the green there, and in the red there is another, I don't know, 15 or 20 acres. That's behind it. That is much more difficult to access because of the current restriction. And I think we would all agree that we're going to build solar, putting it on an old gravel pit
It's a good place.
is a good place, and we should be taking down the barriers for putting solar where there's, an already host solar, it's close to existing load, where the infrastructure is already there, which makes it all cheaper. And, you can take already disturbed sites. The background on single plant is it only really applies to solar projects under 5 megawatts that are on the same or adjacent parcels. It was enacted in 2009 to stop the artificial partitioning of other projects like net metering and standard offer. And it generally prevents the co-location of solar where it could be beneficial to ratepayers. But with the end of offsite net metering and standard offer going away, the single plant rulings just add time, uncertainty, cost to meeting Vermont's renewable energy goals without any benefits to ratepayers. And importantly, towns have begun to move forward with enhanced state energy planning and are trying to cluster solar development, and single plant rulings from the state of Vermont or the Public Utility Commission limit a town's ability to put solar where they think it's appropriate.
Okay, you just said standard offers going away.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's
There's no
really no more
standard offer.
bids being put out there, and
Okay.
the legislature, well, Senate Natural, when we discussed it last year, and in the House Energy Committee, neither seemed to any interest in reauthorizing a new
No.
round of standard offer bidding. So for all intents and purposes, there's a couple megawatts left that'll be bid, but it really isn't in a consequential way.
Okay,
Here is an example of how amending single plant will benefit ratepayers and others and natural resources. You can see there are two solar arrays. There's one on the left, existing solar array, and one on the right, this proposed solar array. While the single plant rule was in effect, this green access road, the developer would have to build a brand new access road at a cost of $50,000 to access the new solar array, because the single plant ruling prevented the sharing of things like roads. Now they can just utilize that green road there, so you don't have to build the road, you don't have to build new power lines along the road, which saves about $10,000 every 100 feet. So when you get rid of single plant rulings, developers are allowed to build solar more affordably, because they don't have to build things like new roads and put up new poles and wires on these existing sites. I think that's very beneficial to everyone without causing any harm to anyone. A second example, and this is a less good drawing, but those 4 blocks down there are 4 houses. And they all want to have their own net metering. And the PUC initially called that a single plant, even though they were like 300 feet apart at times. And that just eventually got permitted, but it caused many months of delays, which adds to the cost. So bottom line is, even for homeowners, if you are not eliminate, but limit the single plant ruling, you're able to put solar up more affordably, not just for the big ones in the fields and stuff, but for homeowners as well. And again, without any adverse impact on ratepayers. And I would also argue that we continue by pushing some more solar together. You are limiting impact on natural resources. I think I wasn't here for the PUC's proposal, but I'm guessing they gave you a map like this. I wasn't sure what they had, but just this is another way of looking at what the under this law, what single plant would apply to. So 2 large power purchase agreements, you can see a standard offer project, you can do a co-location, and you could put in a large solar array, 1 to 5 megawatt, next to a net metering. This is what it will impact. And again, I just want to really be clear for those of you who want to get in the weeds, co-location of net metering arrays and standard offer arrays are still subject to these single plant rulings, meaning there is no real potential for a ratepayer impact by gaming the system. And I think, that was the end of my old computer. And I think that was my last, yes, the only slide you missed was this beautiful aerial picture of a solar array with the word questions on it. So you need to really understand it,
you see solar pictures of.
You've seen plenty of solar pictures.
Saw
Sure.
the array.
So the end of the day, moving forward with H710 would allow for the greater co-location of solar to benefit ratepayers, benefit natural resources, and have no impact on ratepayers by allowing for projects to be artificially partitioned to take advantage of non-farmable.
Is there anyone arguing against this proposal? Okay, because it seems like.
Allison was here, so.
Yes. But she's not now.
I mean, I know she's been very involved with solar siting.
I will say, and I'm not going to speak for the Public Utility Commission, they were here, they did a big public process over the summer and fall, and other entities like the League of Cities and Towns and the Farm Bureau and all these other people who have some interest in this, and no one spoke out against it,
Okay.
I mean, it's a solid proposal.
Okay. And we will do some work on this, because it does have potential for rate impacts and clean up cost impacts.
Yeah. Thank you for your time on a Friday.
Well, we've been here, my goal was to get them out early at 3:30,
Whoa.
but since.
Look at that.
3:30 is
not
holiday
early.
weekend,
You had goal.
people are
3:30 is not
getting out. it's probably why there's so many school classes in here today.
Which